fix myself. All right. All right, all right. We're back at it, back at it. Hold on, my headphones acting a little crazy. All right. Salute everybody, peace and blessings and positivity. We back at it with the AfroTaino book club. Salute to everybody joining us this afternoon. We're gonna start off where we left off yesterday with the Huey P reader. I think we got about 4 hours and 28 minutes left of the book. So I appreciate everybody tapping in, everybody joining us this afternoon. I want to start it off with one of my poems. This one's unreleased before we get into the book. I actually recorded this one yesterday, so I'm going to play it for you guys. Let me know what you think, and let's get into it. Yo, what the fuck is going on? Are we really blinded by this mirage of propaganda? Do we really not see that the system has us going against each other and fighting back and forth while they control us like puppets? Do we not see that we're in a state of no peace? But to have peace is to have understanding. And the understanding we seek seems so far away in a society so divided. We no longer need a colonizer to do the work of a colonizer. Tearing each other down, discrediting each other's historical struggle, causing psychological and physical warfare, like that doesn't fall right into the hands of the man that created the system we've assimilated so perfectly into? I refuse. I refuse to participate, understanding that we were all products of survival in a race of world domination and global power. But the hardest thing to admit is that we were victims and we are products of survival. And understanding that struggle is what unifies us. But somehow the conversations are all around who's black, who's not, who's Latino, who's not, who's native, who's not, whose land, your land, my land, her land, but no plan? God damn. This shit sounds like a scam to distract us from the plan at hand, planned by the man who created the system we've assimilated into. So are we really far off from where they want us to be? Fighting and bickering like it's the new TV for public consumption of the destruction of the oppressed? Really? We've allowed this dark cloud to consume us, a full eclipse. It's like Moondog Punisher snatched the sun and blew it out with a kiss, leaving us in capital punishment's grip, the devil's pit, the land of chaos, self-destruction, and no peace. Never forget. That's a little something I put together. I wrote that I wrote that about a year ago, and I decided to record it yesterday. I added a couple little details at the end. Appreciate all the love and support. But without further ado, we're gonna pick up where we left off with the Huey P reader. We got about 4 hours and 28 minutes left. So let's get right into it. Let's not waste no time.
The Technology Question, 1972. Knowing how to struggle is the essence of winning. Recognizing ills is fundamental. Recognizing how to overcome ills is mandatory. If we acknowledge the U.S. rulers as the prime oppressors, not only of America's internal masses, but also of the world's people, then we must decipher the phenomena that allow for world domination so that it can be overcome. To clearly discuss this crucial issue, crucial to the survival of us all, we have only to observe the form that this U.S. world domination takes. Consider the U.S. protein industry, for example. The U.S. capitalists can yield more milk, cattle, and heifers than anyone because of advancements in the biological and husbandry sciences. With such advancements, man is becoming less dependent upon the natural forces of nature. This particular example alone demonstrates how the crucial issue of our time is the control of technology. Technological advancements have been gained through expropriation from the people, including slavery proper, but also chattel slavery, followed by wage slavery. With this expropriation, a reservoir of information was created so that Americans could produce the kinds of experimental agencies and universities that created the information explosion. Every serious thinker knows that scientific and technological developments do not grow in a straight line. they develop exponentially by leaps and bounds. We thus see that it is because of the expropriation of the world that the technology exists, and the reactionary intercommunalists, the US capitalists, imperialists, are able to dominate world markets. They set the pace, enabling themselves to discredit socialism and communism via foreign aid made available, or unavailable as the case may be, to developing countries. American capitalists discredit wars of liberation, especially the establishment of what we call provisional revolutionary governments, by pouring in the very bounty they stole into the puppet administrations they set up. This is why they keep talking about Vietnamization, because they say, we will supply them. They can supply them. It is for these reasons that I always make reference to a Latin phrase, trespass de bonis asportatis. In the Old English law, this referred to a particular kind of trespass that included the expropriation of someone else's goods. Usually, it was a charge made against landlords who had illegally seized a tenant's possessions. The landlord might ship these belongings to a storage facility or distribute the tenant's articles as he saw fit. In many respects, this is precisely what the U.S. rulers have done with the goods of the people of the world, not with the lock and key of the landlord, but with the gun. This abundance of bounty from robbery has built a monster of technology. In the future, however, this will be good for us because the same super-capitalists will be our supply sergeants. We will feed India, and all of Africa will spring up as one breadbasket. Yet this leads us to the question, why does Africa need contributions from a small continent like North America? Simply put, it is the result of the technology question. If so-called revolutionists would start thinking in terms of this relationship, they would see that Africa will blossom and spread her wings, but only spread her wings when we learn to get from her natural resources a maximum yield. With the poor land in the United States, American capitalists produce more than Africa is producing now. However, this phenomenon develops only after they break the people and expropriate the raw materials and wealth. At that point, the technology is applied at leisure to the spoils. The loot is abstracted and removed to the technological institutes. Another question arises, why do the tyrants fight? They fight simply because of the need of the ruling reactionary circle of the United States to sell the products of their technology to more and more people for capital gains. Consequently, they fight in Vietnam not for the land or for the raw materials found there. Rather, they fight because they need the people. Western capitalists need people in order to have buyers at too high prices for their now over-expanding market. As socialism spreads inexorably, human resources are applied in order to uplift and benefit all, which cuts out the middleman, the capitalist. The capitalist, therefore, will not stand for it, because once he is cut out, the whole exploitive warfare state is doomed. If you do not have a buyer for all the consumer goods that you produce, then what is the purpose of producing more? The monopolist wants himself as the only producer, and he wants the entire world as his consumer. If he cannot sell to you, then he will fight any force that resists him in order to push his product upon you. He will perform this task in an attempt to make it impossible for you to resist. That is, to make you an offer you cannot refuse. The situation is a technological question, because the answer to the dilemma lies in the control of that vehicle to which we have all contributed through the exploitation of our lives and labor. Asia, Africa, and Latin America in particular could have shared with their brethren in the Western world. They would have been willing to share. Historically, the land question was an important question, but at this point, they have taken what they need from most of the lands. Now it is only a matter of capitalizing upon the advancements, the interest made from their original robbery. How do we settle it? The settlement does not lie with the liberation of territory per se, even though we do not stand against that. The Black Panther Party would certainly support the liberation of any territory by those with the correct vision or ideology. We would not support, however, the liberation of territory strictly for the purpose of allowing a national bourgeoisie to take the place of the colonizer.
Talk that shit.
Besides, the national bourgeoisie cannot even exist without relying upon the empire. He needs trade, he needs support to keep him intact, or else the people will struggle again.
Listen.
Therefore, if it is a question of liberating a geographical location in order to free the people, then that struggle must be waged with the idea that freeing the land will free the people only to the degree that they will not have to consume what they do not want to consume.
Really quick, y'all, we're live on TikTok and on YouTube. So if you guys not able to stay long or you want to catch up on the last chapter, do me a favor, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's the same name here on TikTok, AfroTaino 88. And again, tap the screen, share this live. I do believe in socialism. I do believe in free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen, sharing this live, is showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to get the message out to the masses. I really appreciate everybody tapping in on YouTube and on TikTok. Salute to everybody. Each one teach one. Remember that.
The degree of providing the people with the ability to make strong coalitions to develop their resources and technology. This would position everyone to enact the actual overthrow of that force that oppresses all of us.
Right.
When the people unite for that purpose, to gain the strength necessary to move against the reactionary control of the technology in order to expropriate it and then make it available to all, then the question of liberating land will be placed in proper perspective. If the question of liberating land is not placed in this context, then those who struggle run the risk of engaging in meaningless battle and, worse, failure. The most devastating war of our time is the Vietnam conflict. If we look closely at the meaning of this war, we might ask, what does Vietnam will win mean?
Talk about it.
It is inevitable that U.S. military force will be expelled from Vietnamese soil, the ultimate alternative being the complete genocide of the Vietnamese people. Projecting this inevitability, let us consider the question of socialist construction in Vietnam, which necessarily includes the developing of the Vietnamese market in relation to world trade. As far as the country's future ability to trade and sell on the market, it is a very dismal picture, especially when you compare it to the state of California and what that state can overproduce and sell abroad for a lesser price. The cost to the nation or territory with less technology to produce, to refine, and to ship would obviously be greater than the cost for such a process to one in possession of advanced means. Thus, even with the liberation of land, the Vietnamese will remain dependent. There is an undeniable interconnection to everything among all the territories in the world. That is why we say that there are no longer nations. There are only communities under siege by the reactionaries.
Right.
This is where we get the term reactionary intercommunalism. The picture I draw is not a very pretty image. As for the people in Vietnam, I would predict that, after the so-called liberation, the average per capita income will likely be much lower than the lowest echelon in the United States. Of course, the American people look at that situation and remark that our empire, with its overexpanded capitalism, is better than what they arranged for themselves over there. Further, it might be said that we could have built more hospitals and schools for them. Sadly, this is the truth. However, the sadness is due not only to the overexpansion of capitalism, which turned into imperialism and then into an empire with its reactionary intercommunalism, but to Americans themselves enjoying a higher quality of life than everybody else, at the expense of everybody else. The only way to really liberate Vietnam, if not the whole world.
Yo, what he's saying is so... This is why I get frustrated when people want to forget about history or discredit history. A lot of what he's saying that was so relevant 50 plus years ago is still relevant today. Everything he's saying, if you just change the groups of people and rename and put, it's the same thing, man.
Is to crush the U.S. reactionary ruling circle, thereby making the technological vehicle available to everyone.
Like even right now, like individuals want to use propaganda and talking about we got migrant crisis, right? Like people migrate to places due to geopolitical issues. So we have to get out of that like savior complex where we're trying to perpetuate, like we're trying to save other nations by choking them out and, you know, doing all these things that cause effects to their economy, to the local people's way of living. Like, yo, you have to allow the people to do what they need to do in their homeland to rebel against whatever injustices they have occurring. It is not your job as the United States to go into other places, put all these harsh sanctions, do all of these things, right, that hinder their economy, because that's what you're doing. You're choking out their economy, which intends affects the people. So when you affects the people and they can't find a way of living in their homelands, they're more than likely going to go to a place where they can gain a better way of living than the conditions you created. Nobody's saying every country or every place is perfect or everybody runs the way we think. No, but you have to give the opportunities for the people to rebel against their injustices. You can't speak for the... It's like when I tell people, I don't speak for the masses. I'm only one individual, only exposed to so many people, and people are only exposed to me. Like, it's only so much. So to say you speak for the masses, bro, you really got to be out there with the people. You got to be on the day-to-days. You got to know the do's, the don'ts, the good, the bads, the ugly, what make life continue. Then you can speak for the masses. But even then, I don't believe any one individual speaks for the collective of the people. Point blank, period. This is why I don't believe in the dogmatic philosophies and ideologies that people try to make it into a religion. I'm telling you, we're going to have Maoism pretty soon as a religion. And it's not because the philosophies and ideologies aren't good. It's that we're dogmating them, man. We're sitting there using philosophy and ideology against the people instead of using it to teach the people.
This is what the concept of peaceful coexistence means. Peaceful cooptation. If the freeing of the land is part of a people's strategy, then I have no criticism. If national liberation wars are just strategies to mobilize the unconscious peasants or workers, I would agree with that too. However, if the people are laboring under fantasies that they will be liberated through troop or arms withdrawal with the U.S. reactionary ruling circle staying intact, then they are living in romantic finalism. By their own conclusion, they will condemn their very liberty. Because the United States does not need their territory. That is not the question. The people of the oppressed territories might fight on the land question and die over the land question. But for the United States, it is the technology question and the consumption of the goods that the technology produces. The picture becomes even more grim in the face of the open agreements recently made between the two most powerful countries in the world, the United States and the Soviet Union. Arms and trade agreements between these two monsters can only make clearer the predicament that the world's people face, especially the people of the third world. This ultimate compromise on the part of the first worker state presents an even more difficult situation for those engaged in so-called national liberation struggles. They must ask, does peaceful coexistence socialism work? Russia's first mistake came in the form of an incorrect analysis that socialism could coexist peacefully with capitalist nations. It was a blow to the communities of the whole world that led directly to the crippling of the people's ability to oppose capitalist imperialist aggression and aggression's character.
And this is why, not to throw shade and not taking any sides, but this is why Russia doesn't conduct business. It did when it was in its communistic state. This is why China doesn't conduct business today like it did in its communistic state. It's because it's almost impossible to do businesses and deals with geopolitics internationally without doing business with capitalists. It's the reality of it. And I'm not a capitalist. I'm just telling you how things have been played out throughout history.
Remember, the capitalists claim that as soon as you agree to accept their trade and fall under their economic ideology, then they will agree to have peaceful coexistence. The Russians allowed this to happen through naivete or treachery. Regardless of how this came about, they damaged the ability of the third world to resist. They could have given the third world every technique available to them long ago. With the high quality of Soviet development at a time when the United States was less advanced than it is today, the Russians could have built up the necessary force to oppose imperialism. Now all they can do is whimper like whipped dogs and talk about peaceful coexistence so that they will not be destroyed. This presents the world with the hard fact that the United States is the only state power in the world. Russia has become, like all other nations, no more than a satellite of the United States. American rulers do not care about how much Russians say that they are the Soviets. as long as Ford can build its motor company in their territory. In reference to this, I would like to quote two statements. Wherever death may surprise us, it will be welcome, provided that this our battle cry reaches some receptive ear, that another hand stretch out to take up weapons, and that other men come forward to intone our funeral dirge with the staccato of machine guns and new cries of battle and victory. Let the flag under which we fight represent the sacred cause of redeeming humanity, so that to die under the flag of Vietnam, of Venezuela, of Guatemala, of Laos, of Guinea, of Colombia, of Bolivia, of Brazil, to name only the scenes of today's armed struggles, be equally glorious and desirable for an American, an Asian, an African, or even a European. Each drop of blood spilled in a country under whose flag one has not been born constitutes experience for those who survive to apply later in the liberation struggle of their own country, and each nation liberated is a step toward victory in the battle for the liberation of one's own country. Each and every one of us will pay on demand his part of sacrifice, knowing that all together we are getting ever closer to the new man whose figure is beginning to appear. Che Guevara. It is our goal to be in every single country there is. We look at a world without any boundary lines. We don't consider ourselves basically American. We are multinational, and when we approach a government that doesn't like the United States, we always say, "Who do you like? Britain? Germany?" We carry a lot of flags. Robert Stevenson, Ford's executive president for automotive operations, Business Week. We have difficulty selling a progressive political line to not only the hard hats, but also to blacks. It is because the evil of the reactionary ruling circle is often hard to pinpoint. It becomes more difficult when those people in the proletarian group, those who are fully employed, are happy just to have a job with a higher wage than any place in the world. The U.S. ruling circle has succeeded in what Hitler attempted to do. His vision was to rob Peter to pay Paul, even though he used the Jews at that time, like white Americans used blacks, to build the state. He expropriated from the Jews right in their own country, making other Caucasians hate them. This was all done as a forward thrust to shackle the world and, in turn, raise the economy of Germany. The average German supported the Nazis because Hitler was giving them something they had never had before, and they were not concerned at what expense. Although the United States participated in Hitler's defeat, American capitalists took up the same Weltanschauung, the same line. They have raised the standard of living using the same method Hitler instituted, beginning with the generals and crooks in arms, what we call our military contractors, or our military states such as California Lockheed. As U.S. capitalists began raising the standard of living for everybody, they even became somewhat disinterested in their own political line. They may even disguise their fascist moves by making big circuses of political administrators in the arena of human rights. Still, the capitalist keeps the shackles on the workers.
Isn't that what's going on right now? I don't know.
The situation becomes highly complex, for the U.S. capitalist has been able to spread out his entire operation. You put together his machinery in parts, thus you are not building a bomb, you are building a transistor. They raise the standard of living through transistors in order to further rip off/sell its goods to the workers and the people of the world. This began with industrial advancement, going arm in arm with forcing people to buy. As Hitler accommodated the German people with the idea that he would start to minimize the forward assault, offensive, aggressive wars, because that would get them into trouble, so the U.S. capitalist will stop the war, as long as he still controls all the world. The empire will make the people of the world adjust themselves to whatever kind of exploitation is required for consumption, because he is building a gigantic technological empire, starting with the advancements in the latest war equipment. Just as the German people saluted Heil Hitler, we now have the average U.S. worker, the hard hat, waving the American flag. What would Hitler have done? Let's stop the crucifixion of the Jews. The United States will stand for civil rights and stop the crucifixion of blacks, because now the imperialists can let blacks share in it. The US capitalists will say, we will continue to rip off Southeast Asia. We'll continue ripping off Latin America and Africa. With the acceptance of the sharing will come the end of our whole political type ideological war, because the people of this nationalist empire will have a bid in the shackling of the whole world. This is the reason why politics at this stage is so complicated. For in reality, it is non-politics. It does not matter who takes over, as long as the people with the big interest, those that get the big money, can pay off enough people to keep them quiet. Franklin Delano Roosevelt did it in World War II. He delivered a job and a guaranteed income based on the war effort. Everybody rallied to the war, Americans, black and white, who had hated the government only 2 years before that, turned right around and saluted. At present, however, corporate America can boast that if you are a communist, you can run for president. What they will not add is that this is so because the president is relatively unimportant. The technological question is unopposed as far as who benefits from it, because we all do on one level or another.
Listen.
That's so it becomes very difficult to deal with. It is difficult for us to move against that mythical, politically reactionary ruling circle, or to point out the target, because it relates back to the statement that we have to deal with in the end, that ye who is not guilty, cast the first stone. It is difficult to cast the stone because those holding the stone can say, will I be out of a job? I'm looking for a job. Will I join the forces that cannot hire me at all? Will I be fired from General Motors? The problem, finally, is at what point will the centralization coupled with the welfare state no longer be useful in its reactionary form? Moreover, how long will it take the people to see it? Americans are in a position of dependency on the people outside the U.S., those who are getting ripped off. How long will the U.S. imperialists have the ability to pull the masses? They have already shot down the first worker state. Now it seems that even the second worker state is threatened. The world is in a predicament, and we do not have a world policy. We, the people, do not have a world view. Why is Ford one of the biggest philanthropic foundations in the world? Is it because they are kind-hearted? If you go to Ford, you can get almost any kind of program you want in relation to social welfare or a job program. You show them anything that makes sense, and as long as you do not oppose the economic principle of the United States, they will fund it. We just read Ford's policy statement. We carry many flags. We don't even consider ourselves America. We consider ourselves multinational. We don't respect boundary lines. American leaders under the right circumstances will support civil rights. Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon all stood behind the quickest solution to the so-called problems of racial discrimination. They even promoted equal employment. We have all reaped benefits, whether or not these crumbs were given intentionally, and it is the result of having enjoyed these benefits that U.S. rulers are in the position to allow a little liberation. Nevertheless, these benefits affect not only the people inside the United States, but also the people of the world, including the so-called socialist world. They too are bombarded with the same imperialist propaganda, leading socialist people to question the very concept of the new state, the so-called revolutionary socialist state, that cannot provide what the United States can through consumer trade. In fact, there is already a problem within these socialist territories relating to the people's consistent support of the ideology. Even the strength of the people to fight the introduction of U.S. capitalists to foreign markets is beginning to crumble. In other words, a worker in Korea may presently accept the state's drive to work harder, to push production for everybody. The United States government is saying the same thing. We are producing for everybody. We're giving out the goods. The difference, however, is everybody in America has a television, a car, and a relatively decent place to live. Even the lowest of the low do not live anywhere near the level of the poor of the world. Even the average person, the average nigger in the United States, does not
F1,
live as
F1.
low as the average Chinese.
F1 in the
Those who
comments.
support the so-called socialist states will begin to be swayed by the introduction of a U.S. consumer market into their socialist countries. This becomes an even greater problem because reactionary intercommunalism would then infect the very people of that part of the world, as well as blacks and other people in this country. It is a technology people question, and that is why the United States will fight hard for an introduction to new markets abroad. The U.S. imperialists have a serious problem presently in their efforts to reach that point of commerce. It is why they set up puppet governments, so that when the introduction comes, they will be able to pay off those people under the reins of control in the first place. They need a reliable force of compradors, as it were, and cannot afford to pay off everyone to the point of complete acquiescence. If they can make this first step, they will have the necessary force to keep the people in line. After all, they cannot send U.S. troops everywhere. The situation in the first workers' state provides the best example of a struggle for sovereign territory deteriorated into a struggle to accommodate the needs and desires of the people with concessions to U.S. technology, its might, and the infiltration, thereby, of imperialist ideology. One need only take a look at the Russian people today, the so-called socialist people hopping around for tips, or consider those people who went through the 1917 revolution only to end up dreaming of mink coats and two-car garages.
Thank you.
It is important to realize that there is not so much of a deterioration, for the continuity is not broken. If one recalls Lenin's statement in 1917, when he had trouble mobilizing a basically peasant country, one can see why and how such a development occurred. In order to move the peasants against the feudal lords, he said something for which many scholars criticize him, because it created a problem for Stalin when he had to try to nationalize the farms. First, Lenin said, "Break thy shackles, want and dread. Bread is freedom, freedom bread." However, even with this slogan, the peasants could not be moved. Finally, Lenin said, in essence, "The land is ours, seize the land." When he said that, the peasants rose up like a mighty storm. Later, when it was necessary to actualize this, Stalin ended up slaughtering many peasants because they demanded, "The land is ours." Stalin attempted to make the people understand that it was necessary to collectivize the land in order to build the necessary industrial state. His methods may be criticized, but are not the issue here. For it was after Stalin that the Russian state began to fall into its present condition of decay. With such information, one can begin to realize the dialectics of the entire structure. We would not be in trouble at the moment had liberated territories built up their land and overthrown the United States with proletarian international revolution, intercommunal revolution. It did not happen, and a great deal is dependent upon the American people understanding this complex nature of the matter in order to move forward.
Salute to everybody. I appreciate all the love and support. Who's on my shirt is Che Guevara. For those asking in the comments, we're going to go on to the next chapter. I really appreciate everybody. Don't forget, we're live on YouTube as well. So if you guys want to go check out YouTube, I appreciate everybody tapping in from YouTube and TikTok. Salute to everybody. Let's keep tapping the screen, sharing this live. Remember, I believe in socialism, free housing, free healthcare, and free education. So by tapping the screen, sharing this live, it's showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to get the message out to the masses. Again, let's tap that screen. We got another 40, I think this next chapter is like 40 minutes. The same name on YouTube. Yeah, it's the same name. So if you guys ever miss a chapter, you want to go back and listen to some of the books that we listen to, I upload them on the live. I do dual live, so that way you can go back and go check out the missing chapters or go back and catch up what you missed. But salute to everybody. Let's keep it going. We got about 45 minutes to this next one.
Spokesman for the People. In conversation with William F. Buckley, February 11, 1973. The following interview was broadcast on the public television program Firing Line. Buckley, will you explain your concept of revolutionary suicide? Huey, If I may impose upon you, I'll answer your question, but first, I have a friend who is almost dying for me to ask this question. During the Revolution of 1776, when the United States of America broke away from England, which side would you have been on? Buckley. I think probably I would have been on the side of George Washington. I'm not absolutely sure because it remains to be established historically whether what we sought to prove at that point might not have been proved by more peaceful means. On the whole, I'm against revolutions, although I think that revolution will go down as a pretty humane one. Huey, you're not such a bad guy after all. My friend will be surprised to hear that. Buckley, his assumption was what? Huey, he was puzzled. He was inclined to believe that you'd have been on the side of the colonizers. But I'm pleased with your answer, and I agree with you. The only revolution that's worth fighting is a humane revolution. Buckley, also one that succeeds. Huey, yes, eventually. Buckley, I feel that if King George had captured George Washington, he'd have had the right to hang him. Huey, according to law. Buckley, yes. Huey, but revolutions always in some ways contradict some laws. That's why it's called revolution.
Radical change.
Buckley, well, revolutionary justice is its own justice, isn't it? Huey, yes. Of course, it always professes to go under some humane right or humane consideration. I think we can judge revolutions on the basis of how much, in fact, objectively, people are dealt with in a fair way and are given more freedom. One of my principles is that contradiction is the ruling principle of the universe, that every phenomenon, whether it's in the physical world, the biological world, or the social world, has its internal contradiction that gives motion to things, that internal strain. Much of the time, we Homo sapiens don't realize that no matter what conditions we establish, no matter what government we establish, there will also be that internal contradiction that will have to be resolved, and resolved in a rational and just way. Of course, that's very vague. Many times we claim actions are revolutionary when really they're not. So I appreciate your answer, and would agree with that part of it.
Talk that shit.
Buckley, which part? Huey, that the only revolution that is worthwhile and is a real revolution and that succeeds is a humane revolution. Buckley, otherwise it's called an insurrection or a mutiny. Huey, or a rebellion or riot. Buckley, as I understand it, the generally accepted test of the integrity of a revolution is whether it is established once it has taken place, if the people truly support it. Huey, a revolution cannot succeed without the people's support. Changes in authority can be successful, but I think we'd have to have a functional definition. We'd have to stipulate what we mean by revolution. Buckley, well, there are revolutions every 2 or 3 months in Latin America without the people getting involved at all. Huey, I'd probably call that a coup d'etat, but by way of definition, I'd reject your definition. But I appreciate your calling a coup d'etat a revolution. I can function with that. Buckley, fine. And if you want to call a popular revolution, please call it a popular revolution. Huey, I'd have to say that revolution would have to be popular, or else I wouldn't label it a revolution. So really, we're just dealing in the semantics of what a revolution is made of. We won't have to belabor that. Any rebellion that establishes a new authority, if you would like to call that a revolution, then I could entertain it because it's just a word anyway. In governments, changes in relationships between people and authority and institutions, I'd say many forms are taken. Buckley, what would you call the thing that ousted King Farouk? Huey, I wouldn't call it a revolution. Buckley, even though an entirely new order was brought in? Huey, yes, with coup d'etat it's common that an entirely new order is brought in. Buckley, not necessarily. Sometimes a coup d'etat takes away one colonel and puts in another colonel. Huey, sometimes. But other times, a coup d'etat establishes an entirely different relationship between the institutions and the people in a particular place.
Facts.
Buckley, in which case it's revolutionary. Huey, I said I could function with that definition if you insist, but to me, revolution carries a special connotation. Of course, this is only my subjective feeling about it. If I have to distinguish between those changes of power, in my own way of thinking, I would call one a flower and the other a skunk. Buckley, I grant that you have considerable authority in your movement, but I'm not sure that you have the authority to impose your own terminology. Huey, I agree that your definition is not necessarily a lexical definition. I already granted that if you wanted to stipulate that as the definition of revolution, I'll entertain it. I'm not attempting to stipulate a new definition. There are authorities I could cite that would call a revolution a very special thing. One authority would be the scholar-philosopher Chairman Mao Zedong. He would only call a people's movement and the overthrow of the authority by the proletarians a revolution. But I wouldn't support Chairman Mao against you in saying that that is the only definition. Unfortunately, with the English language, or rather the American language, that's a little different from the English language, revolution, becomes a pretty vague thing. You have so many lexical definitions that directly contradict each other. I don't think we should belabor our audience who has the authority to define a particular phenomenon. Buckley, as you no doubt know, the word people, the term popular support, is used by Chairman Mao, as you refer to him in your book, with some sense of proprietorship. That is to say, he always talks about the people. But the people are in fact never consulted about anything. They have never been consulted about Chairman Mao, about any of his regulations, or about any of his foreign policy. Huey, I differ with you. I think that too much of the time, because of our cultural differences, we only consider being consulted within the scope of what we feel being consulted is. For instance, in the West, as well as in Latin America, people say there's no democracy in Cuba because they're not putting the ballot in the box. So therefore, people are not consulted. On the other hand, Fidel Castro says that the people are consulted in an even more severe way, that the authority is put to the acid test. The acid test is that for a long time, the people can be fooled, but they can't be fooled and misused all of the time. The test would be the doom of authority through armed revolution. That is the way the people are consulted in the final analysis. Buckley, I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't think you do either. Huey, well, you can only speak for yourself. I'll be more clear. I'm going to explain a principle. The principle is how the people are consulted in a democratic society. I'm saying that Westerners have a particular definition of what democracy is about, and I can appreciate that definition. Here in the West, it is felt that the only time the people are given democratic rights is when they can put the ballot in the box. You vote for a particular person within a particular framework. What I'm saying is that sometimes people are heard, people participate, and it could be called democracy, because what matters is who defines democracy. In the West, much of the time, if you're not allowed to vote by putting the ballot in the box and choosing an administrative person, if this does not take place, then in the West, we're inclined to say there's no democracy. This is not necessarily true if democracy is defined as all of the people getting a fair share and a fair deal of whatever wealth there is and some control over their administrators. But here, you can only vote within the scope of the definition of the institutions and the authorities that control them. Buckley, democracy consists not only of being permitted to vote, but in being permitted to organize in opposition as to discover whether people are latently on your side. There is no practice of democracy, as commonly understood in Cuba. The assumption that an organization is democratic or otherwise the leader would be overthrown is naive. Huey, there's one fallacy in what I think you would consider a democracy. I could only organize in opposition with the scope defined by the authorities that have control anyway. And this is true in the socialist society as well as in the capitalist society. Buckley, give me an example. Huey, the example is this. In this society, you are not allowed to organize in opposition against the authority through armed resistance with intent to overthrow the government. Buckley, we call that a rebellion. Huey, by law. But you've already agreed that if you had lived in 1776, you probably would have chosen Washington. This definitely would have been against the law. I'm saying that when we talk about organizing opposition against government in this world, nothing that I know about has the audacity at this point to allow anyone to organize in opposition against the authority any way they like.
Listen.
Buckley, I don't understand you. If you want to organize in opposition in the U.S., short of killing people, Huey, hold it right there. Short of killing people. Why do you say that? Buckley, well, because those are the rules. Huey, that's just what I'm saying. You have to operate within a limited scope. Buckley, the rules of democracy are that the art of persuasion has to be practiced short of assassination. Huey, I understand that. There is also the same principle operating in socialist or communist countries. Buckley, give me an example. Where? Huey, well, let's choose the People's Republic of China. Buckley.
Hold on, I'm going to pause it right there because I swear, listening to these two go back and forth is very interesting, right? But if I feel like I'm listening to a TikTok conversation, like I feel like...
Tell me one authority on Huey. We could start with Zhou Enlai. I spoke with him in the People's Republic of China. I had 6 hours of private talks with him. And I had many hours of talks with responsible members of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. I was shocked. I suddenly realized how brainwashed I had been by Western thought. As I sat there, it was said that all state administrations are oppressive to someone. And he started to explain that the capitalist state, that the people who own the capital, are a minority. They oppress the majority through exploitation. He said that in the national state, sometimes a whole nation will oppress the rest of the world with their state national administration. So they're still a minority oppressing the majority of the world's people, the way the Hitler regime attempted to do, and the way this American regime attempts to do. What I thought was so shocking was that he said, while you have state administration, we expropriate from the people. If the people in this country earn $10 an hour, we only give them 8. The difference between us and a capitalist state is that our expropriation is different. We don't have private ownership, so we would give the $2 that we expropriated from the people back for their own welfare. The capitalist state gives it to themselves into their pockets. Therefore, the people are still not free as we would like. However, we work for the dissolution of a state, for our own disappearance. When he said that, I realized that he was saying that he is working for the end of the communist regime in China. I thought that was very honest. That was a statement that led me to believe that if he's working for the dissolution of the state, then opposition could arise to work to wither away territorial boundary lines. Buckley, I'm attempting to pin down a point and I'm losing track of it. I said, who agrees with you? And you said, Zhou Enlai. And then you proceeded to tell me what Zhou Enlai said to you. Huey, I can tell you of other people. Comrade Tung, Comrade Lee. You wouldn't know the difference. I named a person that you're probably familiar with. They say that you're well-read and you are conscious of world events, so I only named one of the officials in China so that you could identify him. I doubt if you've been to the villages, the countryside of China. Have you? Buckley, yes, I did go. Are you aware of the messages that Zhou Enlai sent to Allende, the president of Chile? Huey, yes, I saw the letter. Buckley, and you remember that he said that he does not believe that Marxism can be ushered in by a parliamentary democracy. You know that Zhou Enlai, in that particular statement, said that he does not believe in the right to organize an opposition that is contrary to the dialectics of Marxism. Huey, I would like to make this clear for the audience and for you. I don't know about Zhou Enlai, but I'm not a Marxist. I think the whole concept that Marx tried to lay down as a scholar, a historian, a philosopher, has been distorted. People became priests of Marx. I am not. I think that Marx was a scientist. He tried to point out a very advanced method of analyzing phenomena. It is called dialectical materialism. You can't usher in dialectical materialism because that is the whole order and process of the universe. In other words, I explained one of the principles, that contradiction is the ruling principle of the universe. It gives motion to matter. Contradictions based upon internal strife seem to give it the ability to move and to be transformed.
He need to say it louder for the people in the back.
Societies, people, and my fellow revolutionaries who think that you can usher in a social order through any sort of ideological proclamation are very wrong. The society itself strains itself to fight against colonialism, such as America did with England. After that, a situation arises with workers, unions. There is the struggle against the owners of the factories, and you can come up with another type of order, which is much different from the formalities of the ballot. You don't know where it's really going to progress to until you become such a scientist of the people that you can harness the forces that are in operation and set them in a direction that is most desirable. Buckley, why don't we get a little more concrete, if you don't mind? Let's talk about the Black Panther movement. Huey, I like to argue theory with you probably better than factual things. Buckley, I'm a little more interested in factual things. Huey, I think you're very fictitious. I was inclined to believe that you were a thinker, somewhat of a scholar and a theoretician, but I'm usually wrong about those sort of things. Buckley, I'm also a yachtsman, which doesn't mean that we're here to discuss boats. Huey, I don't know anything about the facts of boats. I couldn't talk to you about that, but I know something about theory. Buckley, let's talk about your party. Why did you feel it necessary to expel Eldridge Cleaver? Huey, he was not expelled. He left the party, and we thought that it was a good time for him to leave because in organizations, parties, companies, there are very bright, articulate people. They often have great influence upon others, and people are impressed. When a person comes in who is articulate, bright, and eloquent, and because of the oppression he's gone through, he becomes somewhat sick. His great influence over the whole administration can lead the whole organization down the drain. Buckley, by doing what? What was it that led you down the drain? Huey, well, when the party started in October 1966 in Oakland, we had the occasion as a strategy to arm ourselves in a police alert patrol. We followed the police. We were very careful to follow city ordinances, gun regulations, state law, and our constitutional rights. But we realized that it wasn't the principle of revolution or the armed principle of our party to take the gun and make the gun the only thing that could fight a revolution. So it was a strategy that was mistaken after I went to prison.
That part.
We realized that we had to treat the issue that the people were most concerned about. After I went to prison, with this influence and much of the respect that I personally gave him, he led us astray. So it was my fault also. The media enjoyed the sensationalism of the gun. In many ways, we set ourselves up for the murder we received. We had to deal with the objective situation to see what changes could be made, the changes I saw that I could support, because there are some changes that I don't support, and I wouldn't call them revolutionary changes. I'm not a leader, I'm an organizer. Buckley, so you think that your organizing talent would result in a victory over Eldridge Cleaver, not your theoretical ability? Huey, well, if Eldridge Cleaver was able, hypothetically, to organize the people, then that would mean that history would denounce me and justify him, or history would justify my way of doing things, or my influence in the party, because really it's the party that really makes things move. I'm influential, and I have a vote, and my vote is probably worth more influence than many other comrades, but I work for that to be changed, as they become more organized, more clear, and gather expertise in organizing. It wouldn't be a fight. I can't conceive of a fight between Eldridge and myself for leadership or anything. If the party said that they think that Eldridge Cleaver is correct, then I'll bow out. The biggest problem is that I don't think that Eldridge will come back. But hypothetically, if he were to come back, I think the media would drop him quickly because we have an affectionate name for him. We call him an MF, or media freak. The media created this kind of ghost split that supposedly occurred within the party. They listened to him and then give a kind of credence to Eldridge Cleaver as a representative of a small party or large faction. But we can't ever find any small cult, party, or anything. However, as soon as the news reporters come in and put the cameras up and start talking, they have created what I call a media organization. It's a little different than a paper organization, but we live in a push-button world now. Buckley, well, given your organizing talent and your theoretical position, why is that? Huey, no, I said I would like to think of myself somewhat as an organizer with some expertise, but I'm not very good, really. If I were good, America would be changed tomorrow or yesterday. But we're still struggling on precinct levels, making many turns and many maneuvers. Buckley, yes, I know that you're struggling. Huey, well, I couldn't be that good because I'm saying from objective evidence that there are not too many changes that I desire that have been made as rapidly as I desired. However, everything is in a constant state of transformation. America's certainly changed. The situation in the country is different from what it was in 1619. I have to acknowledge that. I have to acknowledge contributors to the people's struggle, such as Martin Luther King, or John Brown, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner. I have to acknowledge people who have contributed to change in America. Buckley, well, who said you didn't? I don't know what you're up to. Huey, I'm only up to this. I'm saying that we all play a part in attempting to change things so that we will not have the physical clash that causes the inevitable death of men. I reject violence. There's no need for it, and violence will no longer have to exist. I think that the death of any man diminishes all of us because we're involved with humanity. I would like to admit to you that I don't have the answer to even start to resolve the contradictions in this country so that we can have that new order. But
from my opinion, my bad to cut it right there, but when it comes to like violence and like the activist community and individuals who advocate for, armed revolution before building structure, knowledge, and uplifting one another, I think those are the individuals who have the least experience with violence. Because if you endured or you observed or you've been a product of any kind of violence, you know what comes with that physically and psychologically. And this is why I truly believe in maximum damage, minimum loss to life. And this is why I say, too, when it comes to the activist world, and it's, and it's not to throw shade, it's more in the academia, groups. There's a reality check that's not there. You want to shoot first and ask questions later, not understanding that you don't know the effects. You don't know how that affects people.
A desire, a desperate desire to reach the other shore. And I think that each day, each minute, whether we know it or not, we're slowly in this world arriving at another level. Some other relationship between all of us, whether you define yourself philosophically as a conservative, as a progressive, as a reactionary, or as a revolutionist. Buckley, Mr. Simpson from Trinity College. Mr. Simpson, I've enjoyed the exploration of Mr. Newton's concepts. I thought what you said was quite clear. Huey, well, it seems that Mr. Buckley is the only dunce around here so far. Mr. Simpson, but I'm even more interested in getting a little more practical and down to present social policies in the cities, in the inner cities. The continuing and ever-occurring crisis in the inner cities, where large numbers of people are trapped in a cycle of poverty. I want to know whether either of you can suggest and agree upon a social policy for the inner city that would lead to the reduction of tensions and new levels of communication. Huey, first, I would like to make this very clear so that Mr. Buckley and I don't go off onto another tangent. I saw crystal clear how we can start to reduce the kinds of conflicts that we're having in this country. I saw an example of that in China. This is not China, that is a different culture. Their history is different. Therefore, the transformation there will be different. Things will take a different shape. What I saw was this. When I went there, I was very unenlightened, and I thought that I knew something about China. I thought, as it has been said so often, that China would be a homogeneous kind of racial, ethnic territory. Then I found that 50% of the Chinese territory is occupied by a 54% population of national minorities, large ethnic minorities. They speak different languages. They look very different. They eat different foods. Yet there is no conflict. I observed one day that each region, we call them cities, is actually controlled by those ethnic minorities. Yet they're still Chinese. Buckley, would that include the Tibetans? Huey, yes, there was a big conflict for so long. Buckley, yes, they called it genocide. Huey, well, all right then. You talk about genocide. If the Chinese were wrong then, they're in the barrel with the rest of us, with England as well as America, in your genocide against blacks. The whole Western world has crucified over 50 million blacks alone. America took part in this. You can call that genocide.
Really quick, just to respond to the comments, he sounds a lot. Remember the Black Panthers and the Young Lords and even the Brown Berets, to an extent, consider themselves the children of Malcolm. So if you hear a lot of what he's saying, correlating to what a lot of what Malcolm X had to say, it's because they followed him. That rebellious aspect that they had against the system was inherited from Malcolm X and what he left behind. Remember, everything went to a frenzy once the assassination of Malcolm X happened, and this is when you really started seeing the development of these organizations. It was in reaction of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X is where these organizations were birthed out of.
Talking about a general condition in China where ethnic minorities, I've observed, control their whole regions. They have a right to have representation in the Chinese Communist Party. At the same time, they have their own principles. You talked about organizing opposition. You cannot vote to organize an opposition to reinstate private ownership there any more than you can organize an opposition to take away private ownership in this country. So it's what you choose. I happen to choose the way they go about it, all right? Buckley, I thank you, Mr. Simpson, for listening to this elusive reply to the problems of the inner city. Huey, did I get too theoretical again? Buckley, well, Mr. Simpson will explain it to you later.
Yo, tap that screen.
Huey, then
Let's
I
go.
will say this. The cities in this country could be organized like that, with community control. At the same time, not black control so that no whites can come in, no Chinese can come in. I'm saying there would be democracy in the inner city. The administration should reflect the population of the people there. Buckley, no capitalists like Lin Piao. Mrs. Holland. Huey, you say that Lin Piao was a capitalist? Buckley, I was teasing you. Mrs. Holland, in reading through most of the earlier Panther material, religion was not emphasized, or rather was de-emphasized. Have you and the members of your party rethought about the relevance of religion in the culture of black people of America?
He's touched on this in the beginning of the book.
I think that with any people, religion is almost a necessary thing to engage in. I'm a very religious person. I have my own definition of what religion is about and what I think about God and so forth. As I analyze religion, I find that we are all talking about the same God, the person or thing in nature that we do not know, that we do not understand, that we do not control, but that somehow affects us. In Webster's dictionary, they say that this too could be defined as ignorance. You don't know God, but you know there's something there. You didn't create yourself, so you must have been created. I find it hard to tell a person, don't believe in God, and also tell him, pretend that you know everything, all the answers. So no matter what religion it is, whether Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, God is always that thing, the unknown, the unknowable. I say that it's ignorance. It's ignorance when you don't know, and it's wisdom when you do. My father has been a minister ever since I can remember, and he used to always tell me, you know, the church is the heart of men, and God grows from within. So as we eliminate our ignorance, and our God stops being ignorance and becomes wisdom, and he grows within us, then we will really know who God is. We will see that we walk with him, that we talk with him, that we will find ourselves. We will know that our pipes have been in our mouths all the time. We'll know really who we are, and we'll know who God is. We'll find that he's the all, which is a nonsense term because man only knows events in between the beginning and the end. Both of those are words that maybe Mr. Buckley can define, but I can't. We know there's something outside of events that we don't understand. Buckley. Mr. Moots. Mr. Moots. I have a question for you, Mr. Buckley. Much of the emphasis on modern research, perhaps the concern of students here, has been viewing the Panthers in the last 2 or 3 years and seeing a great deal of metamorphosis that has taken place. Probably we have many more questions for Mr. Newton about where the Panthers stand now compared with the past. I would like to ask you if you have undergone a metamorphosis in your own appraisal. Some of your earlier statements about the Panthers were rather strong. I was curious about your present appraisal. Buckley. My judgment has been publicly made of the Panther movement. It was made on the examination of its literature. I've read the Panther paper and described its contents and its publication. But I don't think that it's an historical exaggeration to say that the Black Panther Party, to the extent that one could infer its thoughts from these declarations, was based on its need to despise the white race. Mr. Moots. Could I suggest an example? In one piece, I believe it was in Look magazine, you disagreed strongly with Dick Gregory, who had indicated that the militant stance, symbolism, and rhetoric functionally could actually displace violence, if you see what I mean. Could you perhaps accept that as a phenomenon? Buckley. Yes. Mr. Moots. Of a positive good that the Panthers have? Buckley. Yes, I could. Unfortunately, as much could be said of the Ku Klux Klan. Dick Gregory gave an example to me that you may not remember about a black woman who felt intimidated. This was about 2 or 3 years ago, and she called the Black Panther headquarters and they sent someone to look out for her. And he was armed. On the basis of the assurance that she got from his presence, she did calm down and recovered her stability. And there is an impression that people can perform that kind of a function armed in that kind of a way. I have no doubt that the Black Panthers did it. Huey. I would like to say this, and I'm sorry if I interrupt, but when people equate the Black Panther Party with the Ku Klux Klan and White Citizens Council, I get upset.
Tap that screen,
The
tap
point
that
is
screen.
dialogue, dialectical struggle, or struggle through words. This would be what I hope will be the next advance man will make, that he will put down the club. But I think there are certain difficulties to face before that point. I think that things don't just happen, they start. But as long as there's a special economic interest one has to support, an authority that one must support, then he creates a rhetoric that he uses in order to sell ideas to a group, an army, or a henchman.
Trump? Oh.
I think that this kind of dialogue would be inflammatory and cause much violence. I think that rhetoric ran amok in the Black Panther Party while the leadership was under the influence of Eldridge Cleaver. It caused murders of many of our people. It laid the foundation so that even the black community could say, oh, see, those bad guys are out there, you see. They always want violence and robberies and so forth. This kind of rhetoric can provoke physical conflict.
Yo, when he's saying the person putting out the that sounds exactly like what's going on right now. When you look at the political dynamics here domestically in the United States, that propaganda, that type of language is going to incite violence. You don't believe me? Go on social media. Go check out X or Facebook for that matter. Listen to what people are spilling out of their little, what we call it, the keyboard gangsters. Go see the kind of language that's coming. That's only going to lead into actual violence in the streets because you have people in prominent positions, perpetuating this negative stigma on people to be able to win over a certain kind of demographic people of voters. It's disgusting.
Dialogue itself carries no virtue unless it's pointed in a direction to resolve a problem, you see? Mr. Moots, what about the role today of the Panthers? You indicate in your "To Die for the People" that one of the first priorities is education. But you don't actually define that. Do you mean political education, the use of the media, or do you mean formal education? For example, would you have advice for the black students here today? Huey, most of us have been taught, we've been programmed by our schools and universities to think in categories. That's very different from thinking dialectically. Many things are in play at the same time, but we think of education to refer to formal knowledge, perhaps, or maybe political education. When I say education, I mean a raising of the consciousness of the people so that external stimuli will bombard the human organism, and from that process, a person will begin to have some sort of awareness of what is going on.
It goes into what I tell everybody. I don't want you to think like me. I want to be able to give you the tools for you to be able to look at things from your perspective and you to be able to pick up your own analysis on the situation to be able to think for yourself. And this is what the system lacks to provide us, is the tools for us to be able to think for ourselves.
I agree with Sigmund Freud in that the first step in controlling what's wrong with you in relation to the social forces is to know what you're dealing with. When I say education, I mean it in the broadest sense of the word. Technical education, we're living in a very technical world now, thanks to the West, is a contribution to humanity. I don't like the way they arrive at it. I accuse them of trespassing. They took away other people's goods and they dominated other people as their very own, and certain people were able to inherit without ever working at all, such as my friend here, Buckley. They, Westerners, protect that interest of the right to inheritance. I say that being educated is to be conscious and know as much as you possibly can so that we can start dealing with this garbage pile we call society. Buckley, for the record, while you were relaxing in jail, I was working. Huey, maybe you call working running your mouth on these TV programs. I don't see any calluses on your hands. Buckley, I was writing all those books you didn't read. Huey, is that right? From what I understand of the books, it didn't take too much time to do that. They're very much like your conversation here. I'm only joking with you because I really enjoy talking with you. No, truly, I think you're very entertaining, and I like the hot kind of debates in which we have to struggle to get to the seed, you know? So I'm sorry if I was hard to take. You've proven yourself to be the gentleman everyone says you are, in spite of all the other criticisms.
Yo, tap that screen. I really appreciate everybody. Yo, that was a good chapter. I don't know about y'all, but it had me entertained and very enlightening. We're gonna do one more chapter. It's 13 minutes and 7 seconds, and we're gonna do that chapter because that ends out part 3, and part 4 I think is gonna be the last part. Yeah, part 4 is the last part where it has maybe another 3-4 chapters in it. So let's end out part 3. It's about 13 minutes and 7 seconds. Again, guys, don't forget we're actually live on YouTube as well, so you can go back and find it. Go back and listen. If you came in a little bit late, you can go back and find it. The name is AfroTaino88, the same way it is here on TikTok. It is the same way on YouTube. But I don't want to keep chatting up. Let's get to the next chapter, right? Let's get it.
Eldridge Cleaver. He is no James Baldwin. 1973. Eldridge Cleaver's prison masterpiece, Soul on Ice, was a manifesto of its time. The book is riddled with powerful insights and contradictions typical of the transitional period of the 1960s. It is a link in that long chain of prison literature brought to its zenith in the 1970s by George Jackson. George Jackson was Eldridge Cleaver's dream come true. Since his release from prison, Cleaver has been acting out his own nightmares. The essay on James Baldwin in Soul on Ice is an angle of refraction into the springs of that nightmare. The essay to which I refer, Notes on a Native Son, is a classically ambivalent attack on Baldwin, his politics, and most of all, his sexuality. There are passages of stabbing relevance and malevolence. Baldwin says that in Wright's writings, violence sits enthroned where sex should be. If this is so, then it is only because in the North American reality, hate holds sway in love's true province. And it is only through a rank perversion that the artist, whose duty it is to tell us the truth, can turn the $2 trick of wedding violence to love and sex to hate. If to achieve this end, one has basically to transmute rebellion into lamb-like submission. You took the best, sniveled Rufus, so why not take the rest? Richard Wright was not ghost enough to achieve this cruel distortion. With him, sex, being not a spectator sport or a panacea, but the sacred vehicle of life and love, is itself sacred. Of all Black American novelists, and indeed of all American novelists of any hue, Richard Wright reigns supreme for his profound political, economic, and social reference. But oh masters, it is Baldwin's work which is so void of a political, economic, or even a social reference. His characters all seem to be fucking and sucking in a vacuum.
F1.
Baldwin has a superb touch when he speaks of human beings, when he is inside of them, especially his homosexuals, but he flounders when he looks beyond the skin. Whereas Wright's forte, it seems to me, was in reflecting the intricate mechanisms of a social organization, its functioning as a unit. Baldwin's Christian survival tactic of love is shredded mercilessly. Christian love and passive homosexual love are mere functions of each other, and the scandal of turning the other cheek in racist America is a madness to Cleaver. He writes, Rufus Scott, a pathetic wretch who indulged in the white man's pastime of committing suicide, who let a white bisexual homosexual fuck him in the ass, and who took a southern Jezebel for his woman, with all that these tortured relationships imply, was the epitome of a black eunuch who has completely submitted to the white man.
F1 in the comments.
Rufus was a psychological freedom writer, turning the ultimate cheek, murmuring like a ghost, "You took the best, so why not take the rest?" which has absolutely nothing to do with the way Negroes have managed to survive here in the hells of North America. This all becomes very clear from what we learn of Eldridge, the arch-ghost of another country, of the depths of his alienation from his body and the source of his need. And it had taken him almost until this very moment, on the evening of his departure, to begin to recognize that part of Rufus's great power over him had to do with the past which Eldridge had buried in some deep, dark place, was connected with himself in Alabama when I wasn't nothing but a child, with the cold white people and the warm black people, warm at least for him. Beneath the glinting surface of the criticism, there is always a paranoid position that must be explained because of the sad and virulent scenario Cleaver set in motion when he put down the pen for the sword, or pretended that he did. In a telling passage, Cleaver throws light on Baldwin and the deviant tradition so threatening to the incarcerated revolutionist. Somewhere in one of his books, Richard Wright describes an encounter between a ghost and several young Negroes. The young Negroes rejected the homosexual, and this was Wright alluding to a classic, if cruel, example of an ubiquitous phenomenon in the black ghettos of America, the practice by Negro youths of going punk hunting. This practice of seeking out homosexuals on the prowl, rolling them, beating them up, seemingly just to satisfy some savage impulse to inflict pain on the specific target selected, the social outcast, seems to me to be not unrelated, in terms of the psychological mechanisms involved, to the ritualistic lynchings and castrations inflicted on Southern blacks by Southern whites. This was, as I recall, one of Wright's few comments on the subject of homosexuality. But that is precisely the buried meaning of Cleaver's essay. Ostensibly concerned with James Baldwin, Cleaver is punk hunting. In 1967, Cleaver was invited to a special dinner for James Baldwin, who had just returned from Turkey, and he in turn invited me. When we arrived, Cleaver and Baldwin walked into each other, and the giant 6'3" Cleaver bent down and engaged in a long, passionate French kiss with the tiny, barely 5 feet Baldwin. I was astounded at Cleaver's behavior because it so graphically contradicted his scathingly written attack on Baldwin's homosexuality in his article, Notes on a Native Son. I later expressed my surprise to Cleaver, who pleaded that I not relay this incident to anyone. I did not understand then, but now realize that Baldwin, the native son, who had neither written nor uttered a word in response to Cleaver's acid literary criticism, had finally spoken. Using non-verbal communication, he dramatically exposed Cleaver's internal contradiction and tragic flaw. In effect, he had said, if a woman kissed Cleaver, she would be kissing another woman, and if a man kissed Cleaver, he would be kissing another man. In Soul on Ice, Cleaver quite accurately explains that self-hatred takes many forms. Sometimes it can be detected by no one, not by the keenest observer, not by the self-hater himself, not by his most intimate friend. Baldwin, in Cleaver's eyes, is a self-hater and a homosexual. Cleaver states, I, for one, do not think homosexuality is the latest advanced over heterosexuality on the scale of human evolution. Homosexuality is a sickness, just as are baby rape or wanting to become the head of General Motors. Cleaver forgets to mention that Baldwin makes no attempt to conceal his homosexuality and thereby escapes the problems of the repressed homosexual. Yes, Baldwin is an admitted homosexual, but he is not a depraved madman. Can Cleaver say the same? Does Baldwin's open homosexuality threaten Cleaver's repressed homosexuality, which manifests itself in violence against women? The lady doth protest too much, methinks. The problems, difficulties, and internal conflict that Cleaver has within himself, because he is engaged in denial of his own homosexuality, is projected onto an eternal self, Baldwin, in order to defend his own threatened ego. He attempts to project his own femininity onto someone else and to make someone else pay the price for his guilty feelings. Cleaver embraces supermasculinity, pretends to despise Baldwin as a punk, while admitting that he, Cleaver, is a rapist. One must despise and or envy women in order to be driven to degrade and ravish them. What does Cleaver think of women? Better yet, what does he think of those black masses that he accuses Baldwin of despising? By his own admission, I became a rapist. To refine my technique and modus operandi, I started out by practicing on black girls in the ghetto. In the black ghetto, where dark and vicious deeds appear not as...
Yo, can you guys do me a favor and help me out with the F1s in the comments? He's getting real graphic since the beginning of this chapter. Just do me a favor, help protect the live. F1 in the comments, F1 in the comments.
Or deviations from the norm, but as part of the sufficiency of the evil of a day. And when I considered myself smooth enough, I crossed the tracks and sought out white prey. I did this consciously, deliberately, willfully, methodically, though looking back I see that I was in a frantic, wild, and completely abandoned frame of mind. Rape was an insurrectionary act. It delighted me that I was defying and trampling upon the white man's law, upon his system of values, and that I was defiling his women. And this point, I believe, was the most satisfying to me, because I was very resentful over the historical fact of how the white man has used the black woman. I felt I was getting revenge. From the sight of the act of rape, consternation spreads outwardly in concentric circles. I wanted to send waves of consternation throughout the white race. He practiced on black women in order to acquire perfection for his rape of white women. This implies not only envy of the female principle, but contempt for blackness, combining the elements of self-hatred and repressed sexual needs. Cleaver degrades black women twice.
And what he's talking about, Cleaver wrote about this in his own book. That's what he's saying. He's referencing even the stuff that he admitted to in his book to talk about the things as this is what you're like. This is what you reflect in your own words.
First by rape, and second by viewing it as a dress rehearsal. By practicing on blacks, he expresses his admiration for whites. He in fact pays white women a childish compliment. He ascends the heights to their vaginas by stepping on the bodies of black women. The irony of Cleaver and his flaw is his self-hatred and his sexual insecurity. His pitiful need for a clear love-hate dichotomy, his need for a clear-cut male-female dichotomy, and his need to be a superhero. Cleaver's criticism of Baldwin rests upon his secret admiration of Baldwin and upon his ambition to become Baldwin in a literary sense. In order to become Baldwin, he must topple and consume him. He had to find in Baldwin a tragic flaw, and it follows that he finds in his hero the things that he cannot, due to built-in totems and taboos, accept in himself. That is, his lack of absolute masculinity and his infantile character. He finds it necessary to make a vicious, apolitical attack upon the psychosexual condition of Baldwin in an effort to appear the superstud and to steal Baldwin's fire. He elevates himself on Baldwin's shoulders. Cleaver once said to me, "Soul on ice is my fire next time." If only this failed revolutionist had realized and accepted the fact that there is some masculinity in every female and some femininity in every male, perhaps his energies could have been put to better use than constantly convincing himself that he is everyone's super stud. How confused and tortured he must be to equate homosexuality, baby rape, and the desire to become the head of General Motors. But Cleaver's imagination is not healthy. It is paranoid and self-condemning. It is consumed by a need to be female and white. He is no Baldwin, no Genet.
Yo, that's the end of that chapter right there, guys. I really appreciate everybody. We're going to end it out with my poem one more time. I like to end it with my poem. So do me a favor, just tap the screen, share this live, and don't forget, go over to YouTube and go subscribe. Everything that we played today, you'll be able to go catch on YouTube once I end the live. So everything from yesterday and the priors and all the other books that we've done and we're going to continue to do will also be archived on YouTube. So when you guys get a chance, AfroTaino 88, go check it out on YouTube. And I recorded this yesterday. I think it's very relevant to what's going on now. Be kind, guys, because I'm sharing a piece of my artwork. But tap the screen, share this live, and here you go. The piece is called No Peace. Yo, what the fuck is going on? Are we really blinded by this mirage of propaganda? Do we really not see that the system has us going against each other and fighting back and forth while they control us like puppets? Do we not see that we're in a state of no peace? But to have peace is to have understanding. And the understanding we seek seems so far away and the society so divided. We no longer need a colonizer to do the work of a colonizer, tearing each other down, discrediting each other's history. Like it's the new TV for public consumption of the destruction of the oppressed? Really? We've allowed this dark cloud to consume us, a full eclipse. It's like Moondog Punisher snatched the sun and blew it out with a kiss, leaving us in capital punishment's grip, the devil's pit, the land of chaos, self-destruction, and no peace.
Never forget.
I appreciate y'all. I appreciate y'all. I'm going to catch you guys mañana. I hope you guys like the poem. I'm going to keep recording, putting some stuff out. My brother Manny Chair, the chairman of Ohio, he's actually been putting some of my poetry and converting it into imagery. So if you've seen one of the videos on my profile on TikTok that's pinned, is one of the videos he did for me. It's called Puerto Rican Resurrection, where it's my response to Pedro Petri's Puerto Rican obituary. I just sent him this one last night because I recorded this last night. So hopefully a couple of days I pop out with a visual for you guys. But I'm going to catch you guys later. Peace, blessing, positivity, y pa'lante.